The emperor laughed first. That was the part the historians would argue about later, whether the laugh was genuine or performed.
Is that all
Whether
they
it was the
managed
laugh
in a
of someone
millennium?
who believed what they were looking at,
Barely
or the laugh
worth
of someone
the
who
fuel,
wanted the
my
room to believe
lord.
they believed it. The recordings existed. The laugh was real. What it meant was the part people disagreed on. What nobody disagreed on was what happened after. The Valdren Emperor Sorath had been conducting fleet reviews for 31 years. In that time, he had stood on observation decks above some of the most formidable military hardware in the known coalition: Keth heavy cruisers, Saravni carrier groups, Veshan destroyer formations that stretched across sensor range in perfect geometric precision. He had a practiced eye for capability. He knew what a warship looked like when it was built to win. He also knew what a warship looked like when it was built to be replaced. The CSS Meridian was 47 years old. That number was not a secret. It was in the vessel's registry, visible to any coalition member who requested access. And several coalition members had requested access specifically because the number was remarkable, in the way that old things that are still functional are remarkable. The Meridian had been commissioned when the emperor was a young officer who had not yet inherited anything, in a shipyard that no longer existed, by a human naval administration whose organizational structure had since been revised 3 times. It was old. It looked old. The hull plating carried the specific appearance of something that had been repaired many times, in many places, by people who had different materials available each time, which produced a surface that was not uniform and did not try to be. The weapon systems were visibly retrofitted, not the original armaments, because 47-year-old armaments would have been genuinely obsolete, but replacements that had been installed at different points across the decades, and which did not share a design language, because they had not been designed together. The drive section had been updated twice. The sensor array was a generation newer than the hull it was mounted on. The communications systems had been replaced so many times that the engineering crew had a running joke about which components were original, the answer to which was, the bolts? Probably, and even those were not guaranteed. It was, by any reasonable visual assessment, not a warship you would take seriously. What it was, by a less visual and more technical assessment, was something considerably different. 47 years of service had not been 47 years of decline. Each repair had been made with the best available material. Each system replacement had been an upgrade. The crew that served on it had stayed longer than crews typically stayed on newer vessels. Because something about the ship's specific character, the combination of its age and its accumulated improvements, and the particular demands it placed on everyone who worked within it, produced a loyalty that newer ships did not always generate. The Meridian was not what it looked like. It had not been what it looked like for a long time. Emperor Sorath looked at it through the observation deck viewport and laughed. If you are watching this from somewhere out in the world tonight, drop your city in the comments. I want to know where this story is reaching. And subscribe to HFY Universe right now, because what the Meridian does next is going to stay with you. Let's keep going. The Joint Fleet Review had been arranged 3 months earlier as part of a coalition diplomatic initiative, a show of mutual military capability intended to demonstrate to all attending parties that the coalition's collective defense was substantial. 7 species, 12 fleets, 3 days of coordinated maneuvers in deep space above the neutral system of Veth 4, humanity had sent the Meridian. This decision had been discussed at significant length within the Human Naval Administration before the invitation was accepted. The discussion had produced 3 positions. The first was that sending the Meridian was a mistake, that it would project weakness, undermine diplomatics, invite exactly the kind of assessment that Emperor Sorath would later provide. The second was that it did not matter which ship humanity sent, because human naval capability was not the point of the review, and any ship would serve the diplomatic purpose equally. The third position, held by a smaller group that included the admiral who ultimately made the decision, was that the Meridian was the correct ship to send for reasons that would be difficult to explain in advance, and that the review would demonstrate more clearly than any briefing document. The admiral's name was Yara Ose. She had served aboard the Meridian for 11 years before her promotion, and she knew the ship the way you know something you have lived inside, not from documentation, but from the specific accumulated knowledge of someone who has spent years in its corridors and on its bridge and in the engineering sections that the official specifications did not fully describe. She sent the Meridian. She attended the review herself, aboard it, which was not required by protocol, and which the diplomatic office had gently suggested was unnecessary. She went anyway. She had a reason, which she kept to herself, which was that she wanted to be on the bridge when it happened. The first 2 days of the review went as expected. The Keth cruisers executed their maneuvers with the precision that made them consistently impressive to any audience formation changes. Executed at speeds that required coordination measured in fractions of seconds. Weapons demonstrations that left no ambiguity about what they were capable of. The Surovny carrier group deployed and recovered fighter units with a timing that was by any measure. Extraordinary a choreography of launch and return that the observation party watched without speaking, because speaking felt like it would break something. The Vaishon destroyers moved in formations that demonstrated both power and coordination in a way that was clearly the product of long practice together. The Kareth heavy units performed a simulated engagement sequence that had the observation party's military attaches taking careful notes. The Valdren diplomatic aide beside the Emperor provided running commentary on each fleet's performance, and the Emperor responded with the specific focused attention of someone who was genuinely interested in what he was seeing. He was interested. That was not in dispute. He was a military emperor who had maintained his position for 31 years, partly through a genuine understanding of capability and what it meant. He knew what he was watching when he watched the other fleets. He assessed them accurately. His notes, reviewed later, showed correct technical understanding of every fleet he observed. He had also said, on the evening of the second day, to the Valdren military attache who was preparing the review summary, that he was not expecting the final slot to be worth documenting. The Meridian's slot was the last on the third day. This was not accidental. The scheduling had been arranged by the Coalition Diplomatic Office, and the human representative had not objected to the last slot. Admiral Ozzy had specifically requested it, which the diplomatic office had found mildly puzzling and had accommodated without asking why. The Meridian moved into the maneuver area at 1400 on the third day. It moved slowly. Not as a dramatic choice. 47-year-old drives did not accelerate the way newer systems did. And the Meridian's approach to the maneuver area had the specific quality of a ship that was covering distance efficiently, rather than impressively. Several members of the observation party made notes. The Emperor said something to the Valdren diplomatic aide beside him that was not translated for the public record, but that several people standing nearby would describe afterward as dismissive. Then the review program indicated that the Meridian's maneuver was scheduled to begin, and nothing happened. The Meridian continued moving at the same pace. No formation change, no weapons system activation, no demonstration of any capability that the review's format called for. Just a 47-year-old battleship moving through the maneuver area at cruise speed. The Emperor said something else. This one was louder. The translator rendered it as, "Is this the demonstration?" At 1423, the Meridian stopped. At 1424, it fired. One shot, not a broadside, not a formation volley, not the kind of multi-system display that the other fleets had produced to demonstrate their firepower. One shot, from a single weapon, toward a target drone that had been placed at the far edge of the maneuver area, as a standard review fixture, the same drone that every other fleet had used for targeting demonstrations, placed at a standard engagement distance that all the previous fleets had engaged from. The Meridian had not been at the standard engagement distance when it fired. It had stopped at 4.7 times the standard engagement distance. The targeting drone ceased to exist. Not damaged, not disabled. Ceased to exist. The precision required to deliver that result at that range was not a number that appeared in the standard review specifications. Because the standard review specifications had been written for ships that were expected to engage at standard engagement distance, and nobody had anticipated that any fleet would need a specification for what the Meridian had just done. The observation deck was quiet, not the appreciative quiet that had followed the Surovny carrier group's timing demonstration, not the impressed quiet that the Keth cruisers had produced. Something different. The quiet that happens when a room full of people who are very experienced at watching impressive things realize they are watching something they do not have a category for. The Valdren military attache, who had been taking notes throughout the review, stopped writing. He looked at his notes, he looked at the viewport. He looked at his notes again. The last entry he had written, before the shot, was a brief notation that the Meridian appeared to be completing its maneuver, without demonstrating any notable capability. He crossed it out. Emperor Sarath was not laughing. He was standing at the viewport with the expression of someone who has said something they cannot take back, and is now watching the consequences of having said it unfold in real time. The laugh had been genuine, he had meant it, in the moment, as the assessment of a man who trusted his own judgment about military capability. He had been wrong, not by a small margin, by a margin that everyone on the observation deck had now witnessed directly. He said nothing. That was also documented. In 31 years of fleet reviews, the Emperor had commented on every demonstration he had observed. He said nothing after the Meridian fired. The silence lasted for 11 seconds. Then the review coordinator's voice came through the observation deck communication system, noting that the CSS Meridian had completed its maneuver, and that the third day of the Joint Fleet Review was formally concluded. The Emperor turned from the viewport. His expression, by the description of the Valdren military attache, who was standing 3 meters away, was the specific expression of a man recalculating. Admiral Osi stood on the Meridian's bridge and watched the sensor confirmation come back. Target eliminated. 1 round. She had known it would be. The weapons officer beside her had known it would be. The entire crew had known it would be, because they had done it before, in conditions that were considerably less favorable than a calm deep space review maneuver in optimal targeting conditions. The Meridian's weapons systems were old in the way that the Meridian's hull was old, retrofitted, accumulated, not designed together. What they were not was what they looked like. The targeting computer had been replaced 12 years ago with a system that was, at the time of replacement, the most precise long-range targeting hardware the human naval administration had access to. It was still among the most precise in service. Not because newer systems had not been developed, they had, but because the newer systems were installed in newer ships that had been designed around them. While the Meridian's targeting computer had been installed in a 35-year-old battleship that had been designed around nothing, and had simply been given the best available equipment and told to use it. There was a specific thing that happened when you put very precise targeting capability into a very robust delivery platform. The robustness was not glamorous. The Meridian had a firing platform stability that its original designers had built in for reasons that had seemed important in 47-year-old naval doctrine, and that happened incidentally, to produce an ideal base for long-range precision engagement that its current crew had spent considerable time learning to exploit. The crew had not publicized this. There had not been an occasion that required it. The review had seemed like an appropriate occasion. Osi looked at the sensor confirmation for another moment. Then she ordered the Meridian back to cruise and turned to the communication system to submit the standard post-maneuver report to the review station. The review station's response came back in 40 seconds, which was faster than standard. It was from the review coordinator, not the standard automated system. It said, "Admiral Osi, the observation party has several questions. Please stand by." She had expected that. The questions took 2 hours. Not because they were complicated, they were not complicated, but because the people asking kept arriving at an answer and then asking the same question differently to see if the answer changed. It did not change. The Meridian had fired 1 round at 4.7 times standard engagement distance and eliminated the target with complete precision. The targeting computer was the system it was documented as being. The crew had practiced the engagement profile during standard training rotations. There was no classified capability involved. Nothing classified. The documentation was available. The documentation was available. And it had been available for 12 years since the targeting computer was installed. And nobody had asked for it because nobody had considered that an old battleship with a visible retrofit history and a 47-year-old hull was worth asking about. Admiral Osi answered every question. She answered them in the same order they were asked, with the same specific accuracy she had used when she requested the last slot in the review schedule, and when she had argued 3 months earlier, that the Meridian was the correct ship to send. She did not add anything that was not asked. She did not explain what she had intended. She answered questions. By the end of the second hour, the review coordinator had run out of questions. The session ended. Osi returned to the bridge. She stood at the primary viewport and watched the sensor display. The maneuver area was empty now. The target drone was gone. The other fleets had returned to their respective positions in the review formation. Everything was exactly as it had been before the Meridian fired, except for the absence of the target drone and the specific quality of silence on the review station's communication channels, which was a different silence from what had been there before. The weapons officer came to stand beside her. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "They are going to request the specifications." "Yes," she said. "And the doctrine briefing, probably." He was quiet for another moment. "Was it worth it?" he said, not critically, genuinely. The question of someone who had been part of something and wanted to understand it fully. Osi looked at the viewport, at the space where the drone had been, at the distance marker on the sensor display that still showed 4.7 times standard engagement range. "The Emperor laughed," she said, "before we fired. Did you see it on the feed?" "Yes," the weapons officer said. "That laugh is going to cost him," she said, "not because of us, because of his own people." Every military attache on that observation deck saw what he laughed at, and then they saw what it did. She paused. "That changes how they think about his judgment. That matters more than the shot." The weapons officer considered this. "You planned it that way," he said. "I planned for the shot," she said. "What the Emperor chose to do before the shot, that was his decision. I just made sure there was something worth deciding about." He looked at the viewport, at the empty space. "One shot," he said. "One shot," she confirmed. Emperor Sorath did not attend the questioning session. He had returned to his fleet after the review concluded. What he said to his staff on the way back was not recorded. What was recorded was the formal diplomatic communication his office sent to the Coalition Review Board 3 days later, requesting the full technical specifications of the CSS Meridian's targeting systems. The request was standard. It was granted. The specifications were sent. The Emperor's technical staff spent 2 weeks reviewing them. Their report to the Emperor was not shared with the Coalition. What was shared, 3 weeks after the review, was a second diplomatic communication requesting a formal briefing on human naval doctrine regarding long-range precision engagement. Admiral Osi received the request. She read it twice. Then she sent a response that agreed to the briefing and proposed a date. Then she went back to the Meridian, which was in dock for its scheduled maintenance cycle, and walked the corridors that she had spent 11 years learning, and thought about the laugh and what it had cost and what the shot had revealed, and how those two things were different from what the Emperor had intended when he laughed. The ship was old. It had always been old, in the sense that it had been old since she first served on it, and it had been getting older since then. But old was not the same as finished. Old meant layered, meant that the things added over the years had been added to something that had proven it could hold them, and that the combination of what it was built as and what it had become was not something that appeared in any specification document, because specifications described parts, and the Meridian was more than its parts. It was the sum of 47 years of decisions made by people who had understood it well enough to improve it without breaking what it was. She stopped at the viewport in the forward observation section, where she had stood many times before. Outside, the dock was ordinary maintenance equipment, service crews, the unremarkable activity of a ship being cared for. She thought about the review coordinator's face when the drone stopped existing. She thought about the silence on the observation deck. She thought about the Emperor's second diplomatic communication, carefully worded, professionally framed, asking for a briefing that 3 months ago nobody in his administration would have thought to request. The Meridian had fired once. One shot, from a ship that everybody had already decided was not worth watching. That was enough. That is the story for today. Drop a comment and tell me what city you are watching from tonight. I read every single one. And tell me this. Did you see the ending coming? At what point did you understand what the Meridian was going to do? If this story kept you watching, share it with one person tonight. It means everything to this channel. Subscribers to HFY Universe if you have not already. New stories every single week and the next one is already being written. Until then, stay human. Even when nobody takes you seriously, especially then.